as a red giant and then will fizzle out into what we call.
Velasquez, who heads an association of fishers, comes here every month to take water samples that often test positive for ammonia and other chemicals. She's spent the past decade sounding the alarm about water pollution, how it kills off fish and drives away herons, kingfishers, and other birds. Along the way, she's made a lot of enemies. 2 years ago, she says, gunmen shot up her house as Velasquez, along with her husband and 2 children, were inside sleeping. Months later, assailants fired on her boat, but Velasquez escaped. And in yet another attack last year, a bullet meant for Velasquez struck one of her bodyguards in the face. He survived, but many Colombian activists have not. A recent report by the London-based group Global Witness ranks Colombia as the most dangerous country in the world for defenders of the environment. Of the 177 green activists killed around the world last year, the report says 60 were murdered in Colombia.
Es una cifra realmente vergonzosa para el país.
It's really a shameful statistic for the country, said Susana Muhammad, Colombia's environment minister. Overall, violence in Colombia has diminished in the wake of a 2016 peace treaty that disarmed the country's largest guerrilla group. But the rebels have been replaced by drug traffickers and criminal gangs involved in illegal logging, gold mining, and land seizures. These groups often target activists who get in their way. In other cases, the culprits are corrupt politicians or shady business owners promoting agro-industry and development schemes. Laura Furones, a Global Witness senior advisor, explains that they are rarely prosecuted.
There's a huge problem of impunity. Most of the cases of killings end up with no one being tried, let alone put in jail.
The attacks on Julie Velasquez began after she denounced irregularities in the awarding of a lucrative city contract for cleaning up rivers and lagoons near Barranca Bermeja. Since then, the Colombian government has provided her with an armored SUV and 2 pistol-packing escorts. Police stop by her house several times per day. I follow her into one neighborhood where drinking water has become contaminated by a natural gas leak. One resident, Johnny Ramirez, is grateful for her support, but worries for her safety. He says her enemies consider Velasquez a loudmouth who must be silenced. Velasquez says that's not going to happen.
Con amenazas, asesinatos, sigue la resistencia.
Despite the threats and killings, the fight goes on, she says, because if we don't do this, who will? For NPR News, I'm John Otis in Barranca Bermeja, Colombia.
This is NPR News.
Good morning. It's 8:43. This is 91.7 WVXU. Coming up on the Marketplace Morning Report, McDonald's is holding its Investor Day presentation today. Now, one topic that is almost certain to come up is a highly anticipated new concept restaurant called Cosmic, named for an alien character featured in McDonald's ads in the 1980s. Also, a look at what the data might entail as the Department of Housing and Urban Development is set to soon release findings from its annual point-in-time count that will provide a sort of snapshot into the homelessness crisis. It's all coming up on the Marketplace Morning Report. That's in 10 minutes on 91.7. Winton Road between Dutch Colony and Oakfield closed because of a wreck. 74 eastbound at Coleraine Beekman. The wreck there has been cleared for traffic stop and go from North Bend. Northbound 7175 at 5th Street in Covington, the left lane blocked by a wreck. Traffic is stop and go from 275 in Erlanger, and southbound 7175 after Dixie. There's a broken down vehicle. It's on the right shoulder.
Support comes from Rheingeist Brewery, reminding you that tonight is Beer for Humans Pint Night. More information about tonight's charitable event is at rheingeist.com.
Support comes from 4546 Vineman's Barrel Hyde Park Square, where you can give the gift of fashion and choice in accessories, sportswear, outerwear, and tailored clothing with 4546 gift cards.
Support comes from Matinee Music House Cincinnati, holding its Nancy F. Walker Memorial Scholarships auditions on February 24th. Instrumental and vocal students in junior or senior years of high school or college studying classical music can apply by the January 29th, 2024 deadline. Winners have since studied at prestigious schools. Details and application materials at matineemusichousecincinnati.org.
9 first warning weather, mostly cloudy, cold today. The high 40, partly cloudy and chilly tonight. The low 31. 36 now in Cincinnati.
Public radio isn't something you think about all the time, but the stories you hear do stick with you. And the Public Radio podcasts are some of your favorites. And you do listen every day. WVXU is your station. Listeners like you keep it going strong. Please donate at WVXU.org. And thank you. Support comes from Cincinnati's Ronald McDonald House, which keeps families with critically ill children together while they seek life-saving medical care far from home. Your support gives them the care they need and eases financial and emotional burdens. You can learn more about ways to give at rmhcincinnati.org. That's rmhcincinnati.org.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from the Pew Charitable Trusts, sharing how communities are restoring trust and solving problems on the After the Fact podcast, available at pewtrusts.org/afterthefact. From the Lodestar Foundation, inspired by the principle that helping someone else less fortunate is a path to a happier, healthier, and more meaningful life. Learn more at lodestarfoundation.org. And from listeners like you who donate to this NPR station.
It's Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Steve Inskeep.
And I'm Michelle Martin. It's holiday time, and for a lot of people, that means the work holiday party is back. But many of us haven't gone to one for years because of the pandemic or budgetary restrictions or both. So we figured now is a good time to remind people of the etiquette so you can get through it and feel no shame about showing your face on Monday. Here to walk us through some of those do's and don'ts is Elaine Swan. She is the founder of the Swan School of Protocol, and she's often called upon by businesses and schools and other institutions for her etiquette guidance. And she's with us now. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. I'm glad to be here today.
So why does this matter? I mean, thinking about how to present yourself at an office party is not just about being fancy, right?
That's true. Presenting yourself at an office party has so much to do with the fact that your social skills, your ability to appear as though you're part of the team, and the opportunity to network with folks that you normally would not have is important.
How common is it for office parties to get people in trouble?
It's pretty common, and the reason why is because there's alcohol involved, number one. Number two, it tends to be after hours or outside of the normal work environment. And so people, for some reason, they have a shift in their mind and they start to feel a little more loose. And then they'll see one person maybe take a step and do something outside of the norm. And so then another person does that, and the next thing you know, you've got almost chaos.
Can there really be consequences? Because people might think, oh, well, it's one night. What's the big deal?
My recommendation is to really approach this and look at it as another stage or level of a job interview. You're being watched. And so let's say, for example, you are just acting a fool and carrying on and so forth. The consequence could be not getting assigned a really big account or even moving up in the company.
You know, people listening to this might think, well, the safer choice, Elaine, is just not to go. What do you say to that?
You must go to the office party. This is your opportunity to have your presence known, to connect with folks. People think this is not something I want to go to. It's social, it's optional. That's one of the biggest mistakes that people can make, outside of standing on the table with a lamp on their head.
Well, why do you say that?
You think, well, you know, there's going to be so many people there, no one will notice that I'm not there. But that's who gets noticed. It's the people who are not there and making your presence known, even if just for a short while, is important, so that as you move on into the new year, folks will recognize, okay, they participated.
So don't drink too much. Do show up. Final piece. What to talk about.
Yes. Do not go to the office party asking for a promotion. don't go there complaining about things as far as the business is concerned. This is your opportunity for people to connect with you and see that you are likable. Think about the folks who are at the party. If someone, took a vacation earlier in the year, or if you do talk about work, be prepared to, let's say, for example, maybe compliment someone on an achievement or milestone that they made during the year. Listen to NPR and see what's going on in the world, and be prepared to have conversations that don't always have to do with the job itself, but let people know that you are likable and approachable at the office party.
That is Elaine Swan. She is the founder of the Swan School of Protocol. Thanks so much for talking with us.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
Santa Claus is coming to town. Santa Claus is coming to town.
This is Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Michelle Martin.
And I'm Steve Inskeep.
Good morning. It's 8:50. This is 91.7 WVXU. In 10 minutes on the BBC NewsHour, Israeli tanks are trying to push deeper into southern Gaza as they go after Hamas fighters there. We'll hear from inside the city. Also, a rare account of extreme hardship in North Korea ever since the country sealed its borders because of COVID, and how a long drought is driving up prices in the world's biggest producer of olive oil. That's all coming up on the BBC NewsHour. It starts at 9 o'clock on 91.7 WVXU.
Support comes from Connect. Connect offers low-cost and no-cost plan options for Kentucky residents. Whether you're continuing coverage or just getting started, open enrollment is underway through January 16th. More details on health plans and enrollment can be found at connect.ky.gov. That's connect.ky.gov.
Support comes from Rock Island, a locally owned remodeling and construction company. Whether it's a porch, deck, bathroom, kitchen, addition, or a whole home remodel, Rock Island specializes in adding modern amenities while preserving your home's original character. More at rockislandrealty.com, bringing great people and great homes together.
Checking on traffic this morning, Winton Road between Dutch Colony and Oakfield Avenue closed because of a wreck. Northbound 7175 at 5th Street in Covington. The left lane blocked by a wreck. Traffic stop and go from 275 in Erlanger. 9 first morning weather, mostly cloudy and cold. The high today 40, partly cloudy, chilly tonight down to 31. It's 36.
Local support for our marketplace comes from Sharonville Convention Center, focused on creating exceptional event experiences. New for 2023 will be the Todd Portune Exhibit Hall with a capacity of up to 2,000 for dinner and 40,000 square feet of exhibit space. The Sharonville Convention Center is dedicated to making your events even better. More information at SharonvilleConventionCenter.com.
Big banks chafe under stricter rules.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Viking. Exploring the world in comfort, Viking offers a small ship experience with cultural enrichment and destination-focused dining. More at Viking.com.
I'm David Brancaccio. It is that most wonderful time of the year when the heads of big banks go to Capitol Hill to brief senators. How are they doing with higher interest rates and more? Also on the minds of bankers, proposed new rules to make banks more resilient to major financial shocks. Some bank executives worry that some of the rules are overkill and could make financial dealings more expensive for consumers. Marketplace's Nova Safo has more.
For months, the banking industry has opposed a set of proposals that would increase the amount of capital they hold to guard against sudden losses. These rules emerged out of the financial crisis during the Great Recession, and they're intended to create uniform standards for giant global banks. For example, banks would no longer rely on their own internal models for assessing credit risk. They'd have to use a uniform standard. Bank executives say the result will be counter to what regulators want, making all sorts of activities, lending, fee-associated services, more expensive for consumers. This is unnecessary, executives say, given that banks easily pass the Federal Reserve's stress tests. I'm Nova Safo for Marketplace.
A private sector count of payrolls out this morning shows only moderate job growth in November, 103,000 more people on payrolls, but pay did not go up as much as expected, the slowest increase in compensation since September of 2021. The bond market is not too captivated by this, with the 10-year interest rate down only slightly to 4.16%. The big employment and unemployment reports come out on Friday. Checking stock index futures, S&P futures up 0.4%, NASDAQ futures up 0.5%. Crude oil is down more than 1%, $71.50 a barrel. Today, McDonald's, of hamburger fame, is holding its Investor Day presentations, a way to update shareholders on things like its reformulated burgers and restructuring, and a new concept called Cosmic, a reference to a character from another planet in McDonald's ads from back in the 1980s. Marketplace's Megan McCarty-Carino has more.
McDonald's has been pretty secretive about the new concept, but leave it to people on the internet to go snooping.
Here it is. I found the Cosmic.
It looks like there are going to be 4 drive-through lanes.
This really does seem like a love child of a McDonald's, a Sonic, and a Starbucks.
Photos of a location outside Chicago show a menu with almost all drinks, says Kevin Schimpf at food industry research firm Technomics.
We're talking energy drinks, specialty coffee drinks, probably a lot of colors going on too, a lot of flavors.
He says, like the limited edition Purple Grimace Shake of last summer, the items could be a hit on social media. They also don't take much space or labor to make, says Professor Alex Suskind at Cornell.
It allows the guests to kind of have a restaurant experience, but at a lower cost or a lower commitment.
It could also allow McDonald's to expand early moves toward automation, on brand for the futuristic alien theme. I'm Megan McCarty-Carino for Marketplace.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Schwab. Schwab knows that investors want control of their financial future. That's why when it comes to wealth management, Schwab is dedicated to giving investors more choices. More at schwab.com.
We're expecting new federal data soon that aggregates surveys of unhoused people from across the country. It's the Department of Housing and Urban Development's yearly point-in-time count of homelessness. For a preview, let us consult Ann Oliva, CEO of the National Alliance to End Homelessness. Thanks for coming back on with us.
Thank you so much for having me, David.
What are the trends you're already seeing? There are new demands on homelessness remediation systems.
Yeah, I think that we're likely to see an across-the-board uptick when HUD releases the results of the 2023 point-in-time count. We also expect to see places where homelessness is going in the right direction, which is down. For example, we've seen really good numbers in places like Chattanooga, Tennessee, where they're really working on driving down the number of people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness. I think we're going to see some decreases in Minnesota and in a few other places where maybe the housing market isn't quite as tight and homeless systems are able to meet the need in better ways.
Renewed pressure is coming from people who are fleeing violence and political persecution in their native countries, asylum seekers who come to the U.S.
That's right. We've seen that households across the board are facing higher housing instability and needs than ever before. And we know that rents remain sky high in many, many places. And all of this is happening just as COVID relief funds are ending. And then we also see, as you mentioned, an inflow of asylum seekers into cities and states across the country that are impacting homeless services systems. People are becoming homeless faster than they can be rehoused. So our systems are working as well as they can. On average, about 900,000 people exit homelessness each year, and that was between 2017 and 2020. And during that same time period, on average, nearly 910,000 people entered homelessness. So you can see that our systems are not able to keep up for a variety of reasons, including the housing market, including an inflow of asylum seekers.
I've seen data showing that a major cause of homelessness is it's too expensive to find a place to live. It's affordability. And there's an irony. The other day we reported on a jump in home prices in the Detroit real estate market. So some might read.
humanitarian ceasefire, the pause in the fighting was so critical because it allowed that access. It allowed us to get in and begin to address the needs of the population. But whilst fighting rages in this way, that is not going to be possible.
So there's the safety part of delivering aid. But what are some of the other issues organizations like yours are struggling with when it comes to getting supplies to Gaza?
I mean, not just Gaza, but all around the world. We continue to see the humanitarian needs in conflicts everywhere around the world, soar. We obviously there is a very real focus now on the situation in Gaza, which is absolutely crucial, but it does mean that there is less attention on the situation in Ukraine, there is less attention on the situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo or Yemen or Syria, where we know the fighting continues and we know that children continue to lose their lives and be denied their rights on a day-to-day basis. And so I think what is critical is that we do not lose sight of the humanity within these situations. I know that there are people out there who are desperate to help, to provide support, to feel that it's not a helpless situation. So donating to organisations like UNICEF is critical. That allows us to ensure that we have the supplies ready when we do have access, when we are provided with that access and that safety to be able to get in. Because ultimately the needs are absolutely huge. It will only ever be a sticking plaster until there is a meaningful, peaceful solution to this. And as I said before, that's what parents want. If you speak to any parent, they want their child's future to be one that is, that's set against the backdrop of peace and stability and hope. And for parents in Gaza, for too long, that has just not been the case.
The World Health Organization is warning about the spread of disease as a result of Gaza's crumbling medical infrastructure. How is UNICEF taking that into account as you continue to try to provide aid?
Yeah, it's one of our absolute utmost concerns. The risk of diarrhea, of malnutrition, of respiratory illness. For children, this can be a death sentence. And so, wherever we respond, ensuring that children have access to health supplies and have access to safe drinking water and sanitation, that is absolutely critical, and that's the case here in Gaza as well. We speak to families now and the water supplies are running low. Many families are having to resort to giving their children dirty water, water from whatever they can collect, and you can just imagine being a parent and having to make that decision, knowing that it's a choice between your child going thirsty or your child running the very real risk of some kind of waterborne disease. That's an impossible choice for any parent to make.
That's Joe English. He's UNICEF Emergency Communications Specialist. Joe, thank you for speaking with us.
Thank you so much, Jen.
For the latest out of Gaza, stay tuned to your local NPR station or npr.org. Coming up, Grammy Award-winning singer and composer Jon Batiste joins us. We discuss his genre-defying music and a new documentary chronicling the return of his wife's cancer at the very height of his career. I'm Jen White. This is 1A from WAFU and NPR.
Experiences of women. Today on 91.7 WBXU.
Support for WBXU comes from the Original Mattress Factory, an employee-owned and operated company hand-building mattresses and box springs in Fairfield for over 30 years and selling directly to their neighbors through 9 Original Mattress showrooms serving the tri-state and Dayton. To learn more about their customer-first philosophy, products, and store locations, visit originalmattress.com.
WBXU is supported by listeners like you and by the Kentucky Arts Council. Kentucky holiday gifts are available, including handcrafted Kentucky arts and crafts, music and theater events, culinary experiences, tours, and more. Gift ideas are at KentuckyTourism.com/holidays. That's KentuckyTourism.com/holidays.
Illegal dumping has been a persistent problem in local neighborhoods. On Cincinnati Edition, we'll talk with Cincinnati's mayor and neighborhood leaders about efforts to address it. Plus, how did Joe Burrow go from backup Ohio State quarterback to a first-round draft pick? We'll talk about his evolution as a player and what the Bengals season looks like without him. Today at noon on Cincinnati Edition on 91.7 WBXU.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, supporting efforts to promote a just, equitable, and sustainable society in its hometown of Flint and communities around the world. More at mott.org. From Storyworth. Each week, Storyworth emails a loved one a question about their life. After a year, they'll publish family memories into a bound book to keep forever. Learn more at storyworth.com. And from listeners like you who donate to this NPR station.
I'm Jen White. This is 1A. New Orleans native John Batiste has been described as a sort of one-man parade. Composer won 5 Grammys at the 2022 ceremony. He's received 20 nominations over his career in genres ranging from R&B to classical. He's collaborated across genres too with artists like Willie Nelson, Lil Wayne, and Lana Del Rey. But as his career reached new heights, and despite the upbeat exterior, there was a personal struggle behind the scenes. In 2021, John Batiste had just received his 11th Grammy nomination and was preparing a symphony performance at Carnegie Hall, while his wife, best-selling writer Suleika Jawad, began treatment for a cancer that returned after a decade in remission. The celebrations and challenges of this chapter of their lives are captured in a new documentary called American Symphony. It was released on Netflix last month. John Batiste's latest album, World Music Radio, got 6 Grammy nominations this year. That includes for Album of the Year and for the Song of the Year for Butterfly. Joining us now from New York is singer and composer John Batiste. John, congratulations on your recent Grammy nominations, and thanks for joining us.
Yes, indeed. Hello, hello, hello.
At the beginning of this documentary, American Symphony, you say that you process things by making them. Tell us what that means.
Well, a really apt example of that is in the composition Butterfly, and also in the song It Never Went Away, which is the closing credit song of the film. These songs came from lullabies that I composed for Suleika, my wife, when she was in the hospital undergoing her cancer treatment. And I never intended on releasing these songs. These lullabies and the themes of lullabies take up 5 hours of storage space on my compositional hard drive. And this was a way for us to change the frequency of the hospital room and for us to connect when she was going through treatment through creative projects she painted. I would write these lullabies, and in some way they made their way into the public through different projects, through my album World Music Radio, through the symphony. But the majority of that creative output was just for that moment and to process that moment.
It was so interesting to watch in the documentary as you said, using the lullabies to change the feeling in that treatment room, and watching her tap into this visual artistry. And it felt to me as if it became a way for the two of you to communicate to each other in a way that just words couldn't express. It felt like it was a way for her to give you a sense of what was happening inside her body, inside her mind, inside her heart. How did you experience that communication?
Well, my wife, Zuleika, is a superstar. She knows how to suffer and to really fight to save her life, which during the process of making this film, we didn't know if she would be alive to even see the film. We didn't know how the film would turn out, and we weren't thinking of making the film. We were thinking of how to survive. So there are things that you tap into as a human being when you're in this space, when you're trying to reach for the real transcendence, the things that are going to pull you out of this situation. Family, love, community, the depth of creativity. There are things that don't really have words to describe them, and they don't really have any way of being expressed other than in these universal languages. And we knew that, and we already believed in that as artists. That's something we've always ascribed to, and has been a driver for us. Creativity as an act of survival.
Let's hear a clip from the documentary American Symphony. Zuleika, as you said, she's a writer and author of the best-selling memoir Between Two Kingdoms. In this clip, you just performed at the Grammys, and Zuleika was undergoing treatment for leukemia.
Everybody's on their own journey. We're all moving towards our ultimate destination. You know, the world defines you. Great success, great failure. You know, her health is failing. Her book is on the New York Times bestseller list. That's her journey. I won 5 Grammys, Album of the Year, biggest prize in music, come home. She's back in the hospital.
John, in so many ways, this documentary is a love story. It's a love story between you and Zuleika. It's, as I experienced it, a love story about your relationship to music, Zuleika's relationship to art. Have you had a chance to go back and watch the documentary now that it's finished?
Well, to be completely frank, I have seen it, but I have trouble watching it for reasons that are obvious emotionally for me to relive a lot of the moments within the film that are transformative for others to view, and which I'm grateful for being an example of what we all face in this universal human condition. It's hard for me at this point in time to continuously go back there.
Sailor. What's that you're singing?
You've heard it before. Just a song I had to learn when I was away from you.
Oh, that one.
That one. When the blues start knocking at your door, and you know you can't take anymore, please don't call me on the phone. I've got problems of my own. Don't sing those sad songs to me.
Come here.
Why'd you do that for?
I've never been kissed in the key of D flat before.
Fine, isn't it? Stick with me, kid. You're liable to find the lost chord.
And so our two stars, Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, have brought to a close our latest bold venture story. Special music was composed and conducted by David Rose. May we invite you to listen again next week at this time for another exciting adventure starring Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, together in Bold Venture.
We'll touch that dial. Coming up next, it's George Burns and Gracie Allen on Theater of the Mind. Support comes from A Step Above Flooring. With over 40 years of experience, the professionals at A Step Above Flooring offer a variety of flooring options for the home, from design to installation. They will bring samples to your home or office, or their showroom is open in Tri-County, and appointments can be arranged after hours. More details from A Step Above Flooring at astepabovefloors.com. I'm Mike Martini. Coming up next, it's George Burns and Gracie Allen. Today we go back to the 7th of February 1946 as Gracie opens a matrimonial bureau. Here's Burns and Allen on Theater of the Mind.
George Burns and Gracie Allen. me. There, you see?
Well, I've been talking with Cincinnati Mayor Aftab Pureball, Keep Cincinnati Beautiful Environmental Services Green Space Director Alistair Probst, Roselawn Community Council Executive Vice President and Beautification Chair Carla Foster, and Evanston Community Council Beautification Chair Yuba Houghton. Thank you all so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much.
You can find links to report illegal dumping on our website, wvxu.org. Up next, we'll talk about how Bengals quarterback Joe Burrow became the football star he is today, and whether the team has a shot at the playoffs this season without it. This is Cincinnati Edition.
Support for WVXU comes from the Legal Aid Society of Greater Cincinnati. Legal Aid works to reduce poverty and provides effective legal assistance to help families obtain stable, affordable housing, employment, and safety. To learn more about its mission and provide support, visit lascinti.org.
Support comes from Westcott and Schaff Picture Framing. From their shop to your walls, Nathaniel Westcott and Company is focused on offering full-service expertise from the selection process all the way through delivery and installation of your art in your home or office. You can learn more at wsframing.com. That's wsframing.com.
Hi, it's Steve Inskeep with an easy way to support this station. Donate a car that you don't need anymore. It's free to you and could be worth hundreds of dollars in support. Thanks.
More information about car donations at wvxu.org.
Support comes from the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine and UC Physicians, where award-winning faculty with expertise in all aspects of medical education strive to ensure that the next generation of physicians are well prepared on day one and every day after. Learn more at med.uc.edu/indispensable.
Support comes from Ensemble Theater Cincinnati presenting Fiona the Musical, November 29th through December 29th. Based on the hit that captured the world's heart, this story follows Fiona's journey from tiny baby to larger-than-life heroine. Tickets at ensemblecincinnati.org. Premier sponsor is Schuler Group. Season sponsor is the LKC Foundation.
This is Cincinnati Edition on 91.7 WVXU. I'm Lucy May. The Cincinnati Bengals faithful had high hopes that quarterback Joe Burrow would lead the team to another Super Bowl this season. But his season-ending wrist injury has raised the question, does the team have a chance of making the playoffs without Joey B? And now does the Bengals Monday Night Football overtime win give fans new hope? We're going to talk about Joe Burrow's evolution from a backup quarterback at the Ohio State University to a first-round draft pick, and we'll discuss the latest on this football season. Joining me are the author of From Bulldog to Bengal, the Joe Burrow story through the eyes of his hometown, and Indiana Wesleyan University professor Scott Person. Welcome, Scott.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Athens youth football coach and co-author of From Bulldog to Bengal, the Joe Burrow story through the eyes of his hometown, Sam Smathers. Thanks for being here, Sam.
Thanks for having us, Lucy.
And Local 12 News digital sports reporter and host of the Skinny podcast, Richard Skinner. Welcome back, Richard.
Thanks, Lucy. Thanks for having me back.
Do you have questions or comments? You can join the conversation by calling 513-419-7100 or by emailing talk@wvxu.org. I think we need to start with what's on so many fans' minds these days, and that's Joe Burrow's wrist injury. Richard, explain the injury and what it looks like it's going to take for him to heal.
Yeah, so he got hurt on a play where Jadeveon Clowney of the Baltimore Ravens kind of landed him on a pass play, stayed in for one more play, threw a touchdown pass to Joe Mixon, and felt a pop in his wrist, and we all saw what happened from that point forward, and obviously, a week and some change later, he had surgery on that wrist. It sounds like he will make a full recovery. He won't be throwing for a while. And it's a significant injury. I mean, it's his right wrist, throwing wrist. He's expected to make a full recovery, but then you wonder how susceptible that is moving forward, especially in a game where you get
how he approaches it mentally. How do you think he's got his head around this situation?
Knowing Joe the way I do, as long as I've known him, I guarantee you this. Let's just say, in high school, they came out with this rule of if you're ahead by 30 points, that's a running clock in the second half. Joe Burrow, and they had the most points scored in a season in Ohio high school history, and he didn't play half the second halves of those games, so he became a coach. In youth football, I noticed by the 5th, 6th grade year, he was my coach on the field. He would orchestrate. He was not a rah-rah guy. He would orchestrate guys that were out of position and make things happen. In college, you seen him, at LSU. He won the guys over. He won those, but you could see him coaching on the field. Making things happen. Joe Burrow is, he's a football junkie. Lou Amarillo said it the other day. He's in his defensive room. So Joe he's utilizing his skills to help the team where it needs to be, where he can help. It may not be physically right now, but mentally, Joe is he's not lax. He's not sitting on the sidelines. And doing what he can do to make those guys better.
Scott, I'll ask all y'all this if we have time, but Scott, do you think he's going to be able to add a Super Bowl ring to all his accomplishments that he's had so far?
Yes. Yes.
We have people from Southeast Ohio have no doubt, from Athens County, that it's just a matter of time, and it's really a matter of how many. I think total faith. They've seen it at every level. So it's just a matter of time.
Huh? What do you think, Sam?
Well, I agree totally. The things that I want people to read this book like you said you read it. When we wrote it, I want it to be able to be like a 5th or 6th grade kid to read this book, take a little inspiration of being knocked down or not being hey, you can't do this, or you're not good enough, or you don't have this, you don't get this opportunity. You keep trying, you keep doing it, and this is what can happen. So any kid can read this book and get a little inspiration from that. Yes, we've seen it from day one, in youth football all the way up. It's just a matter of time, and
Hey Robert, I hear birds. Are you hanging out at a park?
I am, but not just any park. It's right next to LaGuardia Airport, so I can watch these jumbo jets soar in for a landing. There's one now overhead. This plane is so huge and it's moving so fast, but it's still graceful when it touches down.
Did you go all the way out there for a metaphor about our economy having a soft landing?
Don't say it out loud, you'll jinx it, but yes. I was reading the Beige Book this month and I kept seeing all these softer words being used. That in places, employment is stable, and price increases are moderate, and consumer spending is flat.
The Beige Book is that obscure government report that we love to analyze here at The Indicator. But with all that moderation, was there anything exciting in there?
Yes, there was. It's the Beige Awards, our 8 times a year salute to the art and science of telling stories about the economy. I'm Robert Smith.
And I'm Waylon Wong. And just because the Beige Book is an economic report with a boring name doesn't mean it's soft in the middle. Today we go hard, looking for the best anecdotes inside.
After the break.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Spectrum Business. Spectrum Business is made to work the way small business works. That's why Spectrum Business provides internet, phone, and mobile services that are made to work as hard as you do. Learn more at spectrum.com/work.
This message comes from NPR sponsor American Express Business. The enhanced American Express Business Gold Card is designed to take your business further. It's packed with features and benefits like flexible spending capacity that adapts to your business, 24/7 support from a business card specialist trained to help with your business needs, and so much more. The MX Business Gold Card, now smarter and more flexible. That's the powerful backing of American Express. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/businessgoldcard.
It's always good to remind everyone how this show works. works. There are 12 regional banks in the Federal Reserve System. Each one carefully studies their local economy and brings back these little stories of what they see. They collect these stories in the Beige Book, and we tell you which ones are the best.
And this was one of the toughest competitions we've had all year. 2 regional feds were really neck and neck with their narratives about the economy. But we had to give one the runner-up prize. And that goes to the Kansas City Fed.
The Kansas City Fed entry fits our moderation theme today. Consumers there aren't going crazy with spending, but they also aren't closing their pocketbooks. They're sharing. Let me read the excerpt. Quote, consumers were increasingly likely to share a roof and share meals to manage household budget challenges. Demand for rental housing reportedly shifted toward multi-bedroom housing where rent expenses could be shared with a roommate. Similarly, restaurateurs noticed that revenues fell as more customers split dishes and eschew expensive items.
You know what they say, Robert? Sharing is caring.
Right? It's a good lesson for kids, but it's a little concerning. You know, as we talk about a soft landing for the economy, all these little choices matter, and this clearly shows that households are watching every penny.
But they're still going out to eat, so it's not like restaurants are closing. Maybe they're just making a bit less in profit.
Yeah, true. And it's that kind of contradiction we also see in our winning Beige Book entry. Waylon, will you please do the honors?
Yes. The envelope, please. The winner of the Beige for Best Economic Anecdote goes to the Minneapolis Fed.
Coming to the stage is Ron Wirtz, Regional Outreach Director of the Minneapolis Fed. We spoke to him last Friday. Ron, congratulations.
Thank you, Robert. It's a pleasure to speak with you. Pleasure to be a Beige winner again.
Again is the key word there. Minneapolis has taken home a lot of these. If they were a real award, you'd have to fill a whole awards case with them. As it is, they don't take up a lot of room.
Well, they don't take up a lot of room, but we are really just glad that you're paying attention to the Beige Book.
Now, we loved a particular quote you had in the book this time. You were talking about how consumers are being more price sensitive, but at the same time, car sales doing well in the upper Midwest.
I can read the excerpt. A vehicle dealer with locations in multiple district states saw October sales rise by 10% over the last year. A northern Wisconsin banker noted disparate tendencies. Quote, people are mad about eggs costing more, but they'll still buy a car. Ron, you must have laughed when you heard that.
As a matter of fact, I did kind of. We're always on the lookout for anecdotes that kind of crystallize sentiment and maybe do a better job in kind of storytelling than econ speak might. And as soon as I heard this one, I knew it was going to be in our report.
So let's analyze this little statement. Egg prices have come back down recently, but for much of the year, the price of eggs was really emblematic of inflation.
So everyone eats eggs, but when they're $2 a dozen, they aren't special. And I think when you're buying them every week at $4 or $5, you're going to start to notice. And nobody likes paying double for something that isn't particularly special. It's kind of like the budgetary rock in your shoe. It's irritating, but it's not debilitating.
And I guess the difference with cars is that, at the very least, they do feel special.
I think we have realized during the pandemic that people are treating themselves, and they are willing to spend on more, let's say, discretionary things. And I think cars are like that. You don't call it a new car smell for nothing. There's something about going into a new car and that new car smell that feels like you've treated yourself, and I think that kind of qualifies here. So you're not going to give up that car purchase, but boy, eggs still bug you.
New car smell over old egg smell any day, am I right?
Right.
Anyway, I still find this splurging a bit surprising. Most people borrow money to buy cars, and the Federal Reserve has made borrowing much more expensive. So I'm wondering if people are finding it much more difficult to even get good financing for these purchases.
I can't speak directly to that. The only thing I can say is some of my contacts in the dealership space have said they see more people paying with cash, but I can't say exactly how widespread that is.
Well, we wanted to see exactly how widespread it was, so we called up a dealership in Madison, Wisconsin.
My name is Sean Baxter. I'm the president of Kaiser Automotive.
And Sean sells all sorts of makes and models at his lots, but I asked him to show us his biggest seller these days.
Well, definitely still the hot car for us is the trucks. And and I'm at a Ford dealership today, so I would be showing you an F-150 pickup truck.
Classic. What colors you got?
I've got all the made, black, white, gray, silver, even some blues and reds, and we even have an electric F-150.
Sean says, from his perspective, the people who come to his car lot seem to be doing pretty well financially. He confirms that people are paying more cash for their down payments, but they still are taking out loans.
The secret is that not everyone is going to the banks for financing. For those with good credit, the car manufacturers are subsidizing the loan. It's basically a different way to give an incentive to move cars off the lot, kind of like a cash rebate.
Some of the subvented rates right now are going to be as low as 2.9%.
No way.
2.9% for up to almost 6 years. A regular bank rate today is probably in the 7 or 8% neighborhood. So there is a big gap between what the open market's available and what a manufacturer is willing to subsidize.
Sean says he is expecting his sales of domestic cars to be ahead of last year's total, and he's planning to sell even more next year.
You know, it's almost like we have two halves to our brains when we think about the economy. The big part of the brain looks long-term, and it's optimistic about spending money, and it feels like everything is going great. And then the small part of the brain feels miserable and complains about prices every time we're at a grocery store or at a gas station.
That's true. And you don't have to like it, right? You can accept it, but you don't have to like it. So some of those things in your small brain are just a function of, hey, I just don't like paying $5 a gallon for gas. I can, and I can afford it, but I just don't like it.
Gosh, things do get philosophical here at the Beige Awards. Thanks again to the Minneapolis Fed for shining a light on our contradictions.
Wrong. Words from the Fed, we do not give a cash prize for Beiges, but if we did, I assume you'd go out and blow it on new cars.
No, I think I'll just save it like a goodie contest.
Thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate it.
We appreciate the opportunity, Robert. Thanks very much. I enjoyed it.
This episode was produced by Corey Bridges with engineering by Josephine Nionai. It was fact-checked by Sierra Juarez. Cake and Candy is our editor, and The Indicator is a production of NPR.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Carvana. With Carvana's new value tracker, you can track your car's value over time and learn what's driving it with personalized insights and updates. Stay up to speed with your car's value with Carvana Value Tracker. Visit Carvana.com. This message comes from NPR sponsor Corpay. Say goodbye to writing paper checks and using paper receipts and invoices, and say hello to Corpay by eliminating manual and outdated processes with advanced digital products like their AP automation software. It's easier than ever to pay vendors, reconcile expenses, and reduce fraud. Still need to pay by check? They can simplify that for you too. That's the modern-day, smarter way to create efficiencies. Corpay, the smarter payments company. This message comes from the Everyday Wealth Podcast. Money is personal, and with investments, insurance, taxes, and retirement plans, it can also be complicated. So get the bottom line on the latest topics and trends in personal finance and discover opportunities that can make your money work harder. Tune in to Edelman Financial Engine's Everyday Wealth Podcast, hosted by Gene Chatsky, a financial journalist and New York Times bestselling author. Everyday Wealth, available wherever you get your podcasts.
It's time to stop hiding. It's time to be true to who you are. Go ahead, let NPR become your entire personality. At the NPR online shop, we've got free shipping on all orders over $99. Totes, hats, t-shirts, the works. Only until December 8th. Live your truth at a discount at shop.npr.org.
Hi, this is Preston, and right now I'm finishing up my fall semester at the University of Oklahoma. This podcast was recorded at
12:35 p.m. on Tuesday, December 5th.
Things may have changed by the time you hear this, but I'll still be procrastinating studying for any of my finals. Okay, here's the show.
That is such a fun time to be in college at the end of winter break because you have such a long stretch before you go back to school.
I don't miss finals though.
I don't miss finals
either. I'm super happy that I'm not doing that.
I miss long breaks though. Hey there, it's the NPR Politics Podcast. I'm Susan Davis. I cover politics.
I'm Frank Ordonez. I cover the Trump campaign. And I'm Domenico Montanaro, our senior political editor and correspondent.
And after a tumultuous first term in office, what would a second term be like under President Trump? Here's the former president and current Republican frontrunner speaking in Iowa over the weekend.
We will fight for America like no one has ever fought before. With you at my side, we will demolish the deep state. We will drive out the globalists. We will cast out the communists. We will throw off the sick political caste.
Franco, you've been reporting on this, and there are a lot of plans in motion. So let me start here. Who are the architects of the plans?
Yeah, there's a bunch of people who are working on different things, specifically to kind of get Trump some more power if he gets into the White House. And those groups include, or the big one at least, is the Conservative Heritage Foundation. It's leading this kind of government in waiting effort. It's called Project 2025. They've actually organized dozens and dozens of conservative groups who are drafting up these big plans to kind of with the kind of vision for conservatives. They actually wrote this book. I'm actually holding it up right now. 900 pages.
Looks like Black's Law
long. It is a big, heavy, dense book. And the people involved in the effort, the authors of this book, largely are former Trump officials. Guys like Russ Vought, who was the budget director at the White House. Also involved is Stephen Miller. He's been doing a lot of work. Now, they are saying that they are working separately from the campaign, and the campaign says that they're separate from them. At the same time, those involved in these efforts, again, most of them, many of them,
in that Venn diagram.
a lot of overlap, and they're very clear to say that, look, Trump is the best embodiment of the work they're trying to do.
I just stole the book from Franco, and one of my favorite things is just open to a page and read from a random book. But just thumbing through this, it's really interesting because it is almost like a briefing book for a White House press secretary. You know how they're always like kind of thumbing through something, and there's always like these talking points. You open to this, it's 2025 presidential transition project, and it's countering China's development challenge, and it's all these bullet points about it. Climate change, diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda, protecting life in foreign assistance. I mean, this is highly specific stuff, and the kind of things that are intended to get everybody on the same page, speaking the same language.
But I think about it too, it's also clearly a response to the first term where, the shock of Trump's win reverberated. They weren't ready to staff a government. They weren't ready in so many ways. And this time around, they're sending a very different message that not only is Trump ready, but they have plans for almost every facet of the federal government.
Yeah, they were definitely not ready. And they openly admit that the people were put in place were not the right people for their team. And not only that, the biggest argument, though, that they make is that the people who were already in office were working against them. I mean, the big point of this effort is to gain more power for Trump should he get back there. And how they want to do that is overhauling the government. They're not shy about what they want to do and how they're going to do it. How they plan to do it is to get rid of tens of thousands of federal employees and replace them with Trump loyalists. They complain, and then in the last administration, too often they were blocked or slow-walked by the bureaucracy, by career officials. I mean, this is fundamentally a recruitment effort by conservatives to get more conservatives into the government. Paul Dans, he's leading Project 2025 for the Heritage Foundation. He called it a conservative call for conservative lawyers.
This is your calling. This is your moment in life. We're talking to you. You can't just sit there on the sidelines anymore and kvetch about this.
What does that mean? I mean, Trump has talked about the deep state for years. That's not a new term or an idea coming from him. But when they say that this time around they're gonna go after the deep state, what does that mean practically? How would he do that?
So the deep state is those thousands and thousands of career officials who work in an administration regardless of the person in charge, regardless of
civil workers.
Civil workers, federal employees. How they would do that is this thing that's called Schedule F. And Trump actually enacted this through executive order at the end of his term. Biden flipped it as soon as he walked in the door. But what it does is it makes thousands and thousands of these workers more at-will employees. Many of these workers currently have federal protections that prevent them from being fired. You have your political your career staff. The political staff changes, there's like 4,000. They change each administration. But these guys, these are kind of like the nuts and bolts. They're the ones who have the knowledge of how this works. I mean, the government is a complex place. There's a lot of wealth and knowledge in these years of experience. But Trump and his allies, they are looking to change all that because Trump feels like those people are working against him and working against his efforts.
Domenico, it is not, to me, a new idea for a Republican presidential candidate to say the federal government's too big, too unwieldy, and we need to reform it. I mean, Ronald Reagan famously ran on that. And it's a concept that seems built in to the architecture of the Republican Party. But what Trump is trying to do here is sort of take an idea and take it to more of an extreme position.
Well, I mean, look, you could really look at autocracies that have been built up over time where strongmen and dictators try to take away some of the guardrails of democracy, some of those checks and balances that exist within the system, so they can insert loyalists into the government, so that they can take out federal workers who might not agree with their policies, so that they can't get enough through. And in a very divided political time, it's very frustrating, I think, for conservatives, also for Democrats, that things are so tight, things are so close, that it's hard to get a lot done without compromise or legislation that can be pushed through in something that's not as efficient as saying, I'm an executive, I'm an all-powerful executive who can push through their agenda with some teeth, and do that by taking away, frankly, faith in journalists, by saying that law enforcement is out to get you. You create this sense of grievance and victimhood that Trump has done repeatedly, has convinced a significant portion of Americans that these things aren't really as necessary as maybe you thought they were 10, 15, 20 years ago, because they're biased against you and me because of the things that I want done.
Franco, part of this is, quote, deep state, in that Trump would like fewer federal workers or more federal workers that are more loyal to him and his agenda. There's also a view, correct me if I'm wrong, that independent agencies should be more responsive to the White House and the president, that he should have more control over that. And also that the departments should be more directly responsive to the whims and wills of the president. And when I think of that, I think clearly about the Justice Department, which is part of Trump's deep state that he seems pretty most eager to reform.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a big part of this is curtailing the independence of federal agencies. And this group of insiders feel like some of these independent agencies shouldn't be independent, and they should be working more at the will of the President of the United States. They argue that he was elected, he is the leader of the country, and he's the leader of the administration. They feel he should have the ability to enact an agenda. And the Justice Department is one of those examples. I mean, Trump has said very, very clearly on the campaign trail in the same speech that we just played in Iowa, that he plans to overhaul the DOJ. But he's doing it in a way where he wants to overhaul the DOJ, not only put in his people, but put in his people and put in his lawyers so that he can go after his political opponents. I mean, he specifically cited the prosecutors who have launched indictments against him, and that he wants to reverse that and use the DOJ to go after those people who have been prosecuting him. I mean, it's pretty dramatic.
It has long been the practice of presidents to at least try to show that they're independent, that the Justice Department is independent from a president, that a president doesn't have influence over it, so that people can have confidence in that body as being fair in the prosecution of the law, and these consequences that wind up being meted out, whether it's for somebody who committed a low-level crime or somebody as high up as the President of the United States. But Trump clearly has been irritated by the fact that the Justice Department at times didn't go along with what he wanted done. Think about January 6th, the aftermath of that, or even before that, where he was really trying to install these fake electors across the country, looking for Justice Department officials to go along with these schemes. And many, if not most of them, rejected that, fought him on it, and he wants to smooth that over and say, I don't need these guys, I want my guys in place so that I can get done what I want to get done, and have law enforcement be an arm of weaponization that he can use to boost himself.
you know, the government as it's designed is meant to have a system of checks and balances on the president. But what Trump is articulating is a system of fewer checks and fewer balances on the president. And that is, frankly, a radically different view of how America should work. All right, let's take a quick break and we'll talk more about this when we get back. If U.S. representatives were elected proportionally, would it be easier for Congress to get its work done?
This is not the moment to suggest that Congress is getting its work done.
Fair enough.
It's just not.
But what if you could vote for one party, your neighbor could vote for another?
And both candidates would have a good chance of getting elected in a multi-member district.
A hypothetical look at a different way of distributing power. That's in our latest bonus episode for NPR Politics Plus supporters.
This message comes from the Everyday Wealth podcast. Money is personal, and with investments, insurance, taxes, and retirement plans, it can also be complicated. So get the bottom line on the latest topics and trends in personal finance and discover opportunities that can make your money work harder. Tune in to Edelman Financial Engine's Everyday Wealth podcast, hosted by Gene Chatsky, a financial journalist and New York Times bestselling author. Everyday Wealth, available wherever you get your podcasts. This message comes from NPR sponsor Corpay. Say goodbye to writing paper checks and using paper receipts and invoices, and say hello to Corpay by eliminating manual and outdated processes with advanced digital products like their AP automation software. It's easier than ever to pay vendors, reconcile expenses, and reduce fraud. Still need to pay by check? They can simplify that for you too. That's the modern-day, smarter way to create efficiencies. Corpay, the smarter payments company.
Have you ever been there when an uncomfortable question about race comes up but you just don't know how to answer it? That's where Code Switch lives. Each week we talk about race and how it intersects with every other aspect of our lives, especially when it's uncomfortable. Listen now to the Code Switch podcast from NPR.
And we're back, and part of Trump's objective in a second term would be to change how the federal government works, but his campaign is also focused on policy issues. Specifically, Franco, I'm thinking issues like immigration that he's running pretty heavily on right now.
Yeah, immigration is a big one. You know, a lot of these things were in the courts for a long time, but they were implemented in the meantime. But it's also foreign aid. It's the wall. It's withholding funding for Ukraine for something to use for political action. What they want to do in many cases is bypass Congress so that they can kind of push through their agenda without kind of the checks and balances that we were talking about before.
Although I would have to note that if Trump were to win a second term, it's also likely that Republicans would have had a good year and you would have more Republicans in Congress. But the checks and balances on Donald Trump in Congress are fewer and fewer by the day. You know, it's hard to imagine in a next Congress, if he were to win, there wouldn't be as much pushback from Capitol Hill because the people that push back in a first term have either lost or aren't running again, and their power is the shrinking lane of the Republican Party.
Yeah, I think undoubtedly there's fewer people now in the Republican Party who are willing to take him on. You know, a lot of people I think are exhausted. A lot of people are retired. A lot of people were defeated, and they're seeing what the consequences are of crossing Trump if you are a Republican.
It also, you know, you mentioned some of the things that President Trump would want to do would likely be challenged in courts, but also that's a really inefficient way to run a country too in real time. Like the judicial system's slow. It doesn't always result in easy and efficient answers for governing. So it just seems the sum total of how aggressively Trump would try to do all these different things in terms of government management and policy implementation and executive order could be kind of chaotic. I mean, his first term had a lot of moments of chaos too.
No, I mean, in his first term, they had career officials who would say, hey, that's not legal or that's outside of your executive authority. And they still pushed through and tried to implement some of these things. Some of those were rolled back by the courts. They went to the appeals courts. They went to the Supreme Court. They really, took up a lot of time in the court system. What they want to do now, though, is kind of change it even more and get more, Trump loyalist lawyers involved. I think you're going to see this in a much higher degree, because that is specifically what they're trying to do in order to test the system and push the system to areas that no other president has gone before.
One of the extraordinary things to me about this moment is how clearly and aggressively they're running on all of these ideas, but how many people who worked in government, who worked in even Trump's first administration, or worked in Congress who are jumping up and down and saying, like, this is a danger. Like, all of this is dangerous. And former Congresswoman Liz Cheney from Wyoming, she spoke to Morning Edition this week. She has a book coming out, but she's out there talking about this very aggressively.
There was an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal recently where they suggested that even if Donald Trump were elected, it wouldn't be that bad because, of course, we have these institutions and we have these traditions and we have the separation of powers and that people could somehow count on that to restrain him. And one of the main messages of my book is, no, you can't. You cannot count on those institutions to restrain him.
Dominica, we have this conversation a lot, like, is democracy on the ballot in 2024? And in so many ways it is, when you talk about, like, two candidates that have really different visions of how America should work.
Yeah, I mean, I think the election in a lot of ways is about what is America, what does it mean to be American, and what is the vision going forward for what the country is going to be. And there are some people who really are in favor of Trump's approach because Trump has really waged this campaign against a lot of these institutions. And clearly the Biden administration feels differently. You know, Biden saw himself as a transitional figure, somebody who could at least put a pause between Trump and whatever comes next. And, you know, I think that it's going to be interesting to see how this campaign is going to be run.
Yeah, I mean, the people that left, the people who are angry, the former Trumpers who are raising concerns, those are people who believed in the existing institutions. The people who are involved now, who are pushing for Trump, they're the ones who want to change the institutions. I mean, it's
I also think it's important to remember, like, you know, there's Donald Trump, there's Joe Biden, there's Liz Cheney, there's sort of the elites of politics, but the fact that Trump is running on, frankly, a more authoritarian, more aggressive executive, there's a lot of Americans who are aligned with him. I mean, you look at the polls, he's running very competitively. Like, this is not just about him. This is about a significant chunk of this country that believes that, yeah, maybe we do need to start doing things differently. All right, that is it for us today, but I am certain this is not the last word on this. And a note to our listeners, we're going to be in your feeds a little late tomorrow night. There is another Republican primary debate, so we'll be watching so you don't have to, and we'll have something up in your feeds later in the evening. I'm Susan Davis, I cover politics.
I'm Frank Ordonez, I cover the Trump campaign.
And I'm Domenico Montanaro, senior political editor and correspondent.
And thanks for listening to the NPR Politics Podcast.
Hi there, it's Lakshmi Singh from NPR's News Now podcast. I'm one of thousands of NPR network voices coming to you from NPR headquarters and more than 200 local newsrooms across the country. We bring all Americans closer together through free and independent journalism, through music and politics, culture, and so much more. The NPR network, what you hear, changes everything. Learn more at npr.org/network.
Hey, it's Aisha Roscoe from NPR's Up First podcast. I'm one of thousands of NPR network voices coming to you from over 200 local newsrooms across the country. We bring all Americans closer together through free and independent journalism, music, politics, culture, and so much more. The NPR network, what you hear changes everything. Learn more at npr.org/network.
Hey, it's B.A. Parker from Code Switch, the Race and Identity podcast from NPR. I'm one of thousands of NPR network voices and more than 200 local newsrooms across the country. The NPR network. What you hear changes everything. Learn more at npr.org/network.
Hello, listeners. It's me, Sean Ramasfirm from Today Explained, and something special is happening at Today Explained headquarters right now. We are meeting IRL. We used to meet in real life every day, but then came the global COVID-19 pandemic, and then, just like that, we became a remote team. But not today. Today, we're all gathered together in Washington, D.C., talking about how to make an even better show for you. So, while we do that, we're bringing you an episode that originally aired back in May of this year. It's about parking. But before you stop listening, maybe stick with us. Maybe you missed this one, or maybe you hardly remember it. Maybe you'll find it thought-provoking. Maybe this episode will make you want to sell your car. Maybe it'll make you want to buy a new one. Okay, they're telling me my time is up. Take a chance on this episode of Today Explained. Thank you.
Having your identity stolen can be devastating. Financially,
and emotionally. And it feels like identity thieves are constantly inventing new ways to take advantage of unsuspecting people. Now you can stay one step ahead with Microsoft Defender. Microsoft Defender helps keep your personal information safer online with continuous monitoring of threats to your identity and credit. Get timely alerts, monthly credit reports, expert guidance, and even hands-on restoration support when you need help, all in one easy-to-use security dashboard. Maximize your protection with Microsoft Defender. Available with a Microsoft 365 personal or family subscription. Hey there, it's Noelle from Today Explained. Since 2020, Vox has turned to our readers to help us keep Vox journalism free. Most newsrooms make money through either advertising or subscriptions, but for us, there are a couple of big problems with that. First, advertising goes up and down with the economy. And second, we're not into subscriptions. Vox is here to help everyone understand complex issues, not just people who can afford to pay for it. And we cannot do that, of course, if we have a paywall. So if you believe in the public value of news, please help us get to 95,000 gifts by the end of the year by going to vox.com/give.
Paradise, put up a parking lot. Paradise, put up a parking lot. Paradise.
Today Explained.
Henry Grabar is a reporter at Slate, but in his free time, he went and wrote a whole damn book about parking.
I think people rarely think about parking until they have a problem with it, but anyone who has ever tried to build anything in an American city will tell you that parking is an absolutely unnegotiable subject at the heart of everything you could ever want to construct. So I'll give you an example of this. I talked to a Baptist pastor in Chicago who was trying to start a neighborhood church, right? So he found this building on the west side of Chicago and he thought, I'm going to start a neighborhood church here for some 25 families. And this guy, his name is Nathan Carter.
Over half our church live within a bike ride. Several people walk. It's very easy to be in our church without a car.
So he rents this church space, and time comes where he's ready to buy it.
The week before closing, our lender called our contact at zoning just to confirm that we were okay. And that person was out of the country, and it got kicked up to another person. That person said, whoa, whoa, whoa.
And he cannot buy the church because the church does not have enough parking spaces according to the City of Chicago code. The City of Chicago says you need one parking space for every 8 spots in a pew. So Nathan Carter's got this beautiful little church. It's everything him and his congregation have dreamed of, and they cannot buy the building because they do not have enough parking.
We tried everything we could to find a space, but it had to be within 600 feet. It had to be paved, landscaped, lighted. There was nothing that we could find.
So they spent literally years looking for 18 parking spots to satisfy the City of Chicago. And by the time they finally rent a parking lot 10 blocks away, the buildings have become so expensive that he's only able to buy half of the original property that he had planned to. At some point, one of his parishioners said to him, Pastor Carter, maybe this is a sign from God. Maybe this is a sign from God that this is not the church that we were meant to be in.
Brutal.
But it's not a sign from God. It's just the City of Chicago's parking requirements.
It wasn't like God created parking on the 6th day or anything like that.
No. God never created parking. In fact, that's you might even say that's part of the problem.
How much parking do we have in the United States?
Most estimates say we have between 1 and 2 billion spaces.
Holy smokes.
And that probably seems pretty abstract. But I guess one way to think of that is there are about 300 million vehicles in this country.
Right.
So, we're talking between 3 and 7 spots per car. So parking is mostly empty.
How did we get to 1 to 2 billion spaces that are always 75%-ish empty?
I think it was actually well-meaning city planners. Put yourself in their shoes. It's the middle of the 20th century. Your bustling downtown is plagued by a parking shortage.
Good God, this is awful. I've been circling for 10 minutes. At this rate, I'll be late to my tailoring appointment at Bloomingdale's.
No one has anywhere to park. Your stores are moving to the suburbs. You're not sure what to do. And so you decide,
that from now on, every new business or renovated building or any type of land use at all, from housing to nunneries to bowling alleys to tennis courts, will require a certain number of parking spaces.
I foresee this solving the problem completely with no unexpected consequences.
And it turns out they were actually extremely successful at creating more parking spaces.
And it was viewed as a good thing.
I think for a time it was. You know, I looked up like newspaper headlines from the 1950s, and they actually thought the parking shortage was the greatest problem facing downtown.
To be fully dynamic, the American city must now accommodate the automobile. This is the vital factor of our new age.
I think what that shows you is that it was hard to imagine from the sidewalk on a bustling downtown street in 1955 that one day, in fact one day soon, within a couple decades, there would be so much parking downtown that in Buffalo, a planner could joke, it looks like instead of creating space for cars to park, we have created spaces for airplanes to land. But that is indeed what many American cities came to look like in the 1970s and 80s as a result of all this parking that was created.
The red ribbon has been cut on the newly completed Hamilton County Garage, hoped to be the solution to Chattanooga's parking dilemma. The garage is a result of studies in 1975 showing inadequate parking as the primary reason for slackening business in downtown stores.
And what is the upshot of how much space we dedicated in our downtowns to parking?
Well, we've created some really great space for roller hockey. That's something we have accomplished.
Shoot, just go! 1 for 1! Nice good, wild!
We think that most American downtowns are between 1/4 and half parking by surface area. And, you know, even like, so Portland, Oregon, right, seems like a pretty bike-friendly and lively place, right? Like, not a place that you associate with acres and acres of parking lots. But I just saw an analysis that Portland, Oregon, if you were to put all that parking flat, it would occupy 1/5 of the city. So 20% of the entire city is made up of parking.
You know something? I've never paid full price for a parking spot. I can actually feel the street. And I know where not to park, where to park. I'm just not one of those people who just goes into a lot or pays some valet.
I think the most obvious thing is that parking is the greatest determinant of whether or not Americans will drive. And I think when we look at the fact that America is such an outlier in the degree to which people here drive all the time, compared to peer countries like Australia or Canada or something like that, I think parking plays a great role in that. And the reason is not just because parking is a great subsidy for driving, right? If you're going to require that every home have 2 parking spaces, you are essentially making the down payment on the storage of that car for the person buying that home, and they don't even have any say in the matter. So that's part of it. It's a subsidy for car ownership. Building parking is really expensive. So when we require parking with every new unit, we are essentially levying a pretty large tax on the cost of that apartment. I mean, we're talking like a study of low-income housing in California and Arizona on the new parking added tens of thousands of dollars onto the cost of every unit. So multiply that over how many low-income housing units do we need to build in this country to give everybody a place to live, several million? You're talking about a lot of money being spent on parking. But the bigger part, perhaps, is that the provision of all this parking creates environments in which it is difficult or unpleasant or dangerous to walk or ride a bike or use mass transit. You go to a place that is full of parking lots, and it has reached a density that is so low, a density of sort of attractions and amenities and things to do that's so low that you need to drive. And so in that way, parking, it's not just a question of induced demand. Creating more parking creates more driving, but also the fact that an environment that is rich in parking will be poor in everything that you came to park for.
Okay, so Henry clearly has a lot of beef with parking, and up to this point, I feel like for people who love driving everywhere, you could maybe argue that it's worth the amount of space we've dedicated to it. It's worth jacking up the cost of housing. Waiting for the bus sucks, whatever. But then Henry told me about his Google alert.
I have a Google alert set up for parking space murder.
A man ended up fighting for his life after being shot at close range, and you won't believe what cops say the violent clash was over.
You're looking at surveillance video of a fight over a parking space that ended with an unarmed 28-year-old father of 3 killed.
A dispute between neighbors escalates to gunshots, and witnesses say confusion over a parking spot is to blame.
There's a couple dozen parking space killings every year. And I don't think that necessarily indicates that there is something particularly contentious about parking, so much as that the American populace is armed to the teeth and needs better access to mental health services. But one way or another, what we can say is that the provision of parking is pretty messy, right? People talk about fighting over parking as if it's some tragic accident, like, oh, how could this happen? It's like, no, this is a policy choice. You created a system in which, 500 drivers are fighting over the same 300 parking spaces. Multiply that by your Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago, New York, LA, like all these cities that have this situation, and you wonder why people fight? No, I mean, it's pretty obvious, I think.
Henry has some ideas about how we can fix parking. We're going to hear those in a minute on Today Explained. Support for the show today comes from another show. It's called IRL, and it's a show from Mozilla. IRL is a show hosted by Bridget Todd. Their current season is all about people over profit. Some questions they tackle: how do you build truly trustworthy and responsible AI? That feels like a pretty good question to tackle at the moment. In one episode of IRL, you'll hear the stories of people pushing back against companies that hire millions of quote-unquote invisible workers, sometimes for as little as $2 an hour, to review toxic, disturbing content in order to keep it off generative AI like ChatGPT. You'll also hear about the people developing AI tools that instead try to empower folks working on them to make these machine learning systems work for the rest of us. You can search for Mozilla IRL in your podcast player or visit irlpodcast.org.
Support for Today Explained comes from Delete Me. Have you ever wondered how much of your personal data is online for all to see? If you've been the target of a hack or a phishing scam, all of that info might be readily available to data brokers who make a profit off of your personal information. Delete Me offers a way to keep your personal information personal. They can find and remove any personal information you don't want online. You can sign up, you can tell them exactly what information you want deleted, and their experts will take it from there. Sarah Frank is my colleague who works on the business side of things here at Vox, and she got a chance to try out Delete Me.
Delete Me made it incredibly easy for me to remove my data from these sites. They proactively removed my information from a lot of sites and gave me a quick tutorial on how to remove my phone number and address from the remaining data brokers.
Right now, you can get 20% off your Delete Me plan when you go to joindeleteme.com/today and use promo code TODAY. The way to get 20% off is to go to joindeleteme.com/today and enter promo code TODAY at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/today, promo code TODAY.
Vox Creative. This is advertiser content from Microsoft 365.
Last year, more than 24,000 cases of identity theft were reported. Not 24,000 total. That's just the number of kids who had their identities stolen. Kids don't usually find out they've been victims of identity theft until they're taking a big life step, like applying for student loans, which means this kind of identity theft can go undetected for years. Can I be personal for a moment? The thought of my 9-year-old daughter going through something like this makes my skin crawl. There are ways to protect our kids from identity theft right now, like Microsoft Defender. Microsoft Defender helps you protect your family's personal information online with identity theft monitoring, giving you real-time alerts. expert guidance, and even hands-on restoration support when you need help. You get the personal data and device protection all in one easy-to-use app. Maximize your protection with Microsoft Defender, available with a Microsoft 365 personal or family subscription.
What's parking like where you oops. Say it again. Sucks. Today Explained back with Henry Grabar, author of Paved Paradise, How Parking Explains the World. Henry, towards the end of the first half of our conversation there, we got into the real mess that is parking in the United States. We got into your Google alerts, people are killing each other, it sounds bleak. Is there hope?
Yes, I feel some degree of hope, yes.
Tell me why.
Turns out there are a minority, but a very active, busy, and increasingly influential minority of people who are obsessed with the idea that parking, in fact, does explain the world, and that if you create better parking, you make it possible to create better cities. The leader of this movement is indisputably the 84-year-old urban planning professor Donald Shoup, who in 2005 wrote a book called The High Cost of Free Parking.
I think parking is important.
Busy.
From Procter & Gamble, maker of Metamucil, a fiber supplement containing psyllium, a plant-based fiber for trapping and removing waste in the digestive system.
The average car is parked 95% of the time.
He's like the Pope of parking studies.
And in an audience this large, some of you were probably even conceived in a parked car.
His book is the Bible of people who are interested in parking reform. He's funny, he's charismatic, and he has been absolutely happy, thrilled even, to see this book make its way out into the world and see these parking reformers start to invade city councils and community meetings and work their way into politics and development and begin to build a little less parking.
Does his movement have a name?
Well, the movement is called the Choupistas.
The Choupistas?
The Choupistas. Yes, in fact, like if you If you are by a computer and you go to Facebook, you can look up the Shoepistas group, and I kid you not, there are thousands of people who go there to discuss parking.
What are the Shoepistas pushing, though?
There's 3 tenets of Shoepism, right, that Donald Shoup proposes in his book, and those are: stop the parking minimum. So if a developer wants to build parking with her apartments, she can do that. If she doesn't want to build parking, she doesn't have to.
I'm down with that idea, especially if it forces people to use public transportation.
I'm just interested as to know then where all of those people would end up parking.
It sounds reasonable, you know what I mean? You're trying to get rid of one thing to make something else work.
Second tenet of Shoupism is to charge a market price for street parking. So if you have a place where there are more cars that want to park than there are parking spaces available, instead of adding millions of miles of driving to the road every year, creating greenhouse gas emissions, other externalities of driving, you just charge enough for the parking that there's always a spot available.
I don't know. Here, there are people that have plenty of money that will pay anything to just park.
Everything is charged more. Where's the charge less at?
The third one is to spend that money locally, because obviously everybody hates paying for parking. But in the places that have managed to implement such a program successfully and convince people that it's worth it, they spend that money in the neighborhood.
I like that idea.
So I'm okay with paying more if I know the money's going to a good cause.
In their pocket.
Highly skeptical.
Right.
What about all the parking we already have in this country? These sound like great reforms for the future, but what about the stuff that we've got?
It depends where you are, really. I mean, I think a lot of the reform is about finding better ways to manage the parking that we have, which means charging the right price so that people will stop fighting over it. It means finding ways to share parking between buildings that need it at different times. Like a church, for example, might have a parking lot that they use on a Sunday morning, but they don't use it the rest of the week, and there might be a restaurant next door that's open only at night, and then they need a parking lot. And maybe the restaurant and the church could work together and just use one parking lot instead of each having 2. That doesn't seem like much, but like multiply that out at scale and you've halved the number of parking spaces in the country. So that's a lot of land that could be put towards other things, such as planting trees or building affordable housing.
It sounds promising, but also what we're doing in a lot of smarter cities. I want to hear how electric vehicles are going to shake up this whole situation.
They are going to seriously shake up this situation because, I mean, think about it. The whole function of a parking space is about to change. For 100 years, a parking space has been a place where you store your car and you leave it and you walk away for days or even weeks at a time. But now, with electric vehicles, a parking space is suddenly going to become a much more valuable asset because it's going to be the place where you charge your car as well.
Whether you're new or a veteran, even the best EV owners can sometimes forget the basic rules of charging etiquette. I think we're just learning the basic rules of charging it. We haven't forgotten it. We're still hammering it out, I think.
And that means access to parking is about to become, ironically, a key tenet of helping the country meet its climate goals and helping wean us off fossil fuels, because transportation is, of course, the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in this country. So if parking is the way people charge their cars, and we need everybody to start charging their cars and buying electric vehicles, we unfortunately must make sure that everyone has access to a parking space where they can charge their car.
Research from the U.S. Department of Energy shows up to 90% of charging happens at home. But in older neighborhoods like Seattle's Central District, residents could be stuck on roads with no outlet.
I think if you look at electric vehicle distribution right now, it tends to be concentrated in high-income areas, which is no surprise because EVs are expensive and the used car market is pretty thin. And the way people buy them is that they tend to buy them as their second or third car. to go alongside a gas-powered car that you would take if you were going on a cross-country road trip or something like that.
Now that's why today I'm signing an executive order setting out a target of 50% of all passenger vehicles sold by 2030 will be electric.
And what that means is that we are going to see the profile of electric vehicle owners shift. So instead of just being rich people who own EVs and money being the great determinant of who owns an electric vehicle, we're going to see that change. And I think in the next 10 years, the determinant of who owns an electric vehicle is not going to be money, but it's going to be parking.
How come? Because if the convenience of where you can charge your car is going to be the deciding factor?
I mean, that's what the surveys show. People buy electric vehicles when they have a place to charge them at home. 2/3 of Americans have their own home garage. No surprise, it's often the largest room in the house, the biggest architectural feature in the facade. Everybody loves their garage. And if you're buying an electric vehicle, you can spend between a couple $100 and a couple $1,000, get a nice level 2 EV charger installed in your garage. No problem for you. However, 1/3 of American households, which is to say tens of millions of households, do not have a personal private garage at home. They either share garages in their condo or apartment buildings, or they park on the street. And so for those people, the question is, how are they going to charge their cars? And so it's become increasingly urgent, this idea that we have to find a way to make charging accessible for those people. Because otherwise they're not going to buy EVs, and otherwise we're going to end up with a 2-tiered system in which people with home garages own electric vehicles, and people who don't get stuck driving gas-powered vehicles.
I feel like when I watch TV, every other car commercial I see is for an electric car. That could be wrong, but that's definitely the vibe I get, especially big moments like the Super Bowl or whatever.
General Motors is going electric, and Netflix is joining in by including more EVs in their movies and shows. Believe they can do.
It feels like car companies have rethought their entire inventory as a result of these government initiatives and obviously consumer demand. It feels like consumers are starting to rethink the vehicle because of EVs. Do cities have a golden opportunity here to rethink parking with electric vehicles?
One option is just electrify every single parking space. That's going to be insanely expensive. It's going to take forever. Frankly, it's beyond, I think, the capacity of most cities. And so then the decision is, okay, where are we going to put the chargers, and how are we going to make sure that people share them? Ultimately, what's required here is installing some public charging, and then rethinking the way that people think about parking and charging, because the place where these chargers are installed is not going to be a place where you can go and leave your car for days at a time. People are going to have to shuffle in and out, you know? That poses perhaps the greatest rethinking in terms of people's relationship with parking that we will have seen in quite some time. I think that's the positive side. And then the negative side, perhaps, is that in many cities, we are just beginning to think about all the other ways we could potentially use this public space that has, for decades, for a century, been allocated exclusively for the free storage of private automobiles. And right at that moment, we are going to install a bunch of super expensive infrastructure along the curb that ensures that for decades to come, all that space will be used exclusively for parking cars. And I think that would be a shame.
So we've got an opportunity to like hit this out of the park right now, or just stumble and make the same mistakes we've been making for 100 years?
No pressure.
Grabar's book all about parking is called Paved Paradise, How Parking Explains the World. It is out now. Find it wherever you find your books. Our show today was produced by Miles Bryan. It was fact-checked by Siona Petros, Amanda Llewellyn, and Laura Bullard. It was mixed by Michael Rabiel and edited by Matthew Collette. Thanks to Amina Al-Sadi and Rob Byers, and thanks for listening to Today Explained.
Sometimes it's kind of difficult because if you need to find a parking spot in the park and the whole building is around, circle around the park, whether you park on the road or beside the mini playground.
It's time to stop hiding. It's time to be true to who you are. Go ahead, let NPR become your entire personality. At the NPR online shop, we've got free shipping on all orders over $99. Totes, hats, t-shirts, the works, only until December 8th. Live your truth at a discount at shop.npr.org.
Hey, I'm Kelly McEvers, and this is Embedded from NPR. And for the next few weeks, we're going to be bringing you a story about a young activist. Someone like Malala Yousafzai or Greta Thunberg, someone you've never heard of. She's a dissident named Karima Baloch, and she was forced to flee to Canada because of her work fighting for human rights in her home country of Balochistan, which is a province of Pakistan. In 2020, Karima's body was found on the shore of Lake Ontario. And this focused a lot of attention on the disappearances and deaths of other Pakistani dissidents and the huge pressure these activists face. The 6-part series is called The Kill List. It comes to us from our friends at the CBC. It was published last year in 2022, and now in 2023, with 2 wars going on, and at a time when dissidents, activists, and journalists all over the world are under threat, we think this series is more important than ever. It's hosted by CBC reporter and producer Mary Link. She spent a year and a half investigating the disappearances of activists, tracking down people in hiding, getting them to talk to her on the record. She won a media award for human rights reporting for the series from Amnesty International Canada. And just a quick thing before we get started, this episode does contain difficult subject matter, including references to suicide and torture. If you or someone you know might be considering suicide or are in crisis, call or text 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Okay, Mary is going to take it from here. This is The Kill List, Episode 1, Death of an Icon.
I'm going to tell you a story that a powerful state doesn't want you to know, about a crisis they've tried to keep hidden, about tens of thousands who have disappeared, and others who have escaped, only to have the threats follow them around the world. It's a story so dangerous to tell that for some it's meant ending up on a kill list. And when some who fled to the West ended up dead, many began to question, is nowhere safe? Could they have been assassinated? Let's begin on an autumn day in 2020. A small group of protesters has gathered in downtown Toronto. Commanding their attention is a young woman named Karima Baloch.
When I look around today, I see people standing around.
She's wearing a beautifully embroidered shawl wrapped loosely around her head and shoulders and reading from a speech in her hands.
Today we are here to remember one of my friends, Shabir Baloch. I am not sure if he or many others like him are still alive in the Pakistani torture cells. This is actually not the story of Shabir Baloch. It is the story of entire Balochistan.
There's a good chance you've never even heard of Karima's homeland of Balochistan, a province in western Pakistan, or the human rights abuses against her people, the Baloch. But Karima is trying to change that.
It has been 2 decades. A whole generation has been raised on the roads, marching for release of their sons, daughters, brothers, and fathers. I ask myself, do we deserve to live like this?
She's small, 5'3", but her presence is one of undeniable strength.
So let me ensure those who abduct, torture, and kill, you You can inflict pain and suffering upon us, but you can never stop us from our quest for justice. May I remind you that in the end of every battle fought for justice, it's the fate of the Goliath to fall.
In Pakistan, the threat of assassination hung heavy over Karima's head. Surrounded by the abductions and killings of family members and fellow activists, Karima knew she could be next.
I find courage and hope in stories of struggle against oppression.
Today, she is standing in the city where she fled for her life, and despite constant threats over the years, warning her to stop speaking out, she's refused. Seemingly impossible to silence, until she was.
As a longtime critic of Pakistan, 37-year-old Karima Baloch devoted her life to speaking for the people of Balochistan. She was reported missing on Sunday.
I suddenly got a call from a very close friend, who was also a very close friend of Karima. What's happening with Karima? Where is she? I said, what are you saying? He said, have you watched the news? I said, no. She went missing and nobody knows where she is.
She was found dead in Toronto on Monday. She's been living in exile in Canada for several years.
It was really shocking in a country like Canada. We came here for safety. I cannot explain it. We are in shock.
As friends and family mourn, her death is making international headlines.
Prominent Baloch activist has been found dead. Baloch activist and staunch critic of Pakistan government Karima Baloch was found dead under mysterious circumstances in Toronto. She has been vocal about Pakistan army and government atrocities in Balochistan.
And while the press was reporting her age as 37, she was actually only 34, according to a family member. Karima was revered by her people for her defiant activism against the Pakistani authorities, despite the mortal danger it put her in. In 2016, Karima was named in the BBC's annual list of the world's 100 most inspirational and influential women, but I first heard of Karima Baloch the day after she went missing, the day her body was pulled from the frigid waters of Lake Ontario off the shores of Toronto.
They told us around, I think, 1 p.m.
Samir Mahrab is Karima's older brother. He remembers that day when the police told him they'd found his sister's body. It was December 21st, 2020.
They found her body around 7 or something like that. And that morning, they said they found her body in the water. So that was it. They told us that was it.
And then what happened?
They told us we're gonna contact you. You cannot see the body right now. They said it's still considered an evidence. We cannot show you the body because of the nature of the case. It's on the death. We still don't know what happened.
But some close to Karima worried they knew what might have happened, that Pakistan had found a way to assassinate her in Toronto. Less than a day later, Samir says the police had more information for the family.
After 16 hours, they start calling us and they start talking with us and trying to convince us that there is nothing to look into. And this is just a case of self-harm, or if